about, we have on stage one professional, but I would consider him as entrepreneur as well. That's Paresh. This lady introduced him as executive editor. I think because it's a book session, there's a little mixture with all these things. She's executive director. Because Paresh left a cushy job 19 years back and joined a new bank. So you won't do that unless you have a streak of entrepreneurship in you. And the other two gentlemen, both Nirmal and Rasesh, they are entrepreneurs. They left their jobs. Nirmal Jain, Hindustan Lever, and Rasesh ICICI. So essentially, this session is on migration from being a professional to entrepreneur. But the context is the book. I'll start you with the obvious that when last year I came up with the idea of, rather my publisher came up with the idea of writing a book on HDFC Bank, and of course I approached HDFC Bank to give us some time and tell us the story. You had a lot of reservations because you were a US listed bank and there are lots of issues. You are not very sure about how the information will be handled because you can be pulled up by regulators both overseas and abroad, and finally you relented. So it was not a book of assigned by your bank, but you did to some extent cooperate in giving information and all. The entire idea was to catch the story of entrepreneurship. The entire idea was to catch the story of New India. How a group of professionals left their comfortable jobs in their 30s and early 40s, and all of them came with a mission to create a new bank, to tell the world that India can have a world-class bank. And it's very relevant today, but now because once again after this 19 years, of course in between there was once only Reserve Bank of India opened the window, but once again RBI on a full scale opened the window, asking, inviting applicants for licenses and new banks to come up and all. Your migration or transformation from being a professional at that time a middle level or between junior and middle level professional at a foreign bank, shifting, leaving the bank, leaving the comfort zone, leaving the bank house and big cars, settling for a small any 118 those days, small 2-bedroom flats in suburbs, Mumbai suburbs. There are problems with children's education, so on and so forth. Not only you, for your other colleagues and all. And looking back this 19 years, how do you look back your journey? And at the heart of, do you feel that, I mean, there was and there is still a stick of entrepreneurship, which is why you took the leap of faith? And how did the book describe the entire journey of you guys?
Well, I think you pretty much summed up the entire thought process which was there when some of us left our jobs and became part of HDFC Bank. And I think to be fair, when you talk about an entrepreneur, there are several elements to that, but I think perhaps the two elements which are significant are, one of course is the fact that you are starting something completely new, which does by definition involve a certain amount of risk. It does involve creating something from perhaps close to nothing. The other piece of course involves that risk staking your own capital. And I must confess that, unlike the other two here who staked their capital, the only capital that some of us as professionals stake was our ability to generate income, which was, which is what we were already doing at that time. Because the sort of quintessential middle class background and aspiration was that, you have completed your education, you're doing a job. Most of us, or a lot of us, were in foreign banks, in what you rightly called a comfort zone. And therefore, starting something from scratch was not something which came very naturally to us. But I think we felt that if the institutions that we were working for, and these were, doing rather well for themselves, that there were some things which were sort of constraining our ability to contribute and create something completely new. And here was an opportunity to create something which we believed could actually make a difference to banking in India. Sounds very sort of pompous, but in our own way, we felt that this was an opportunity for us. And which is why, and of course, to be fair, there was a bit of a safety net because it was not starting completely on your own. We had the backing of, HDFC, which, straight away gave you a certain position in terms of the brand, in terms of some capital backing. So I would say that, we were somewhat limited entrepreneurs. Yes, on an individual basis, each one of us went through that uncertainty because I know I got my sort of appointment letter on a piece of paper which was completely blank. There wasn't even a letterhead which had been printed then. And it therefore there was a typed in HDFC Bank in brackets proposed. And when I took that home, my parents, my wife and so on, I mean, I'm sure that they tried not to, discourage me, but I could see that it was not a very happy situation that, they were being faced with. Fast forward to, right now or in the last few years, clearly I think it was, there's no question of any regret. If anything, I think there's absolute delight in having done what we did. I must confess that we did not realize at that point of time that we would be part of an institution which, on hindsight, did extremely well for itself. And therefore, there's a tremendous sense of satisfaction. And I think that is what really an entrepreneur, looks for, because he creates something and then, sure, there may be financial and other sort of gains along the way, but I think what is really what ultimately gives you that satisfaction is that what you started off with, you've been able to create. On the book, I think the hesitation was one that, we felt we were still fairly young. Writing books is like giving lifetime achievement awards. You sort of are gently telling the person that, your best years are behind you. So there was, some amount of, and yes, there were these sensitivities that what sort of, how you would handle, as you said, the data, because, will there be pieces of information that could in any way compromise the institution vis-a-vis various stakeholders. Fortunately, I must confess that, when we got over that hurdle and we decided that let's give Tamal open access, one thing was very clear was that it was going to be his book, in as much as, we would have no say in his views on it. But that if there was anything which was factually incorrect, he would, give us the liberty of putting the facts and, he would certainly take that into account. And I must confess that, I must say that, that is something that he did. But, Tamal being the professional that he is, he researched across all, various senior employees, past employees, customers, regulators, investors, and that's how he came up with the book. I think what really delighted us was that it's not like a historical, writing what happened, dates, numbers, and so on. I think what he captured was really the softer aspects of what happened when the bank was being created. And I must confess that if a lot of us who were part of that journey, there were aspects that he brought because we saw some things from our side. And when he, in his book, covered the same incident from perhaps the other side, for instance, when it was an acquisition from the side of the person who was, selling the bank, or from, sometimes from a customer or a regulator's view, it was a bit of a learning for us as well, or it is certainly something which, we sort of figured out for the first time ourselves. So that's where it is. I think from a relevance to the new, licenses, I'm sure, the industry, the banking in India is still, has a long way to go. It's an underpenetrated market. There are market share pickings as well from various segments in the industry. So while it's a tough business, I think there is more than enough for several more players to come in and pick up. So,
Yeah, thanks, Paresh. Paresh we said he claimed to be a half entrepreneur, so let's shift to a full entrepreneur, Rasesh. Yeah, about the book, you said that it was very different that you say, but that was the entire objective, to tell a story in a very nice way. And today also we are here to tell a story, the story of migration from being a professional to entrepreneur. So tell your story. How did it hit, when did you hit upon the idea? Where was that eureka moment? When was this? And how was it?
I think if you see, I think whether, IIFL or HDFC or even Edelweiss, I think we are all products of what I call the new India, because I think all this was after the economic liberalization really started off underfoot. So I think in 80s we had the IT companies that got started in a very entrepreneurial way, And I think after the economic liberalization in India, there was a lot of opportunities in other professional services, including, in finance and banking and all. And I think all of us are products of that. So in a way, I think somewhere unconsciously, the economic liberalization was the starting point. And I remember I used to, when I was working in ICICI, I used to deal with quite a few entrepreneurs who were clients of ICICI, putting up projects and all. And I could see the change in entrepreneur because from the business groups which were earlier dominating, there were new companies which were coming out, and I was in the exports group, so we were dealing with a lot of companies in the IT sector and the pharma sector in those days. And you could see these new age entrepreneurs, and I think I got a lot of respect for entrepreneurs in my days in ICICI. In fact, I come from a traditional Gujarati business family. So my idea was actually I went to IIM Ahmedabad and did MBA and all because I didn't want to be in business. I wanted to be a professional wearing tie, maybe hopefully working in a foreign bank one day. So the whole idea was that you wanted to be a professional, and I thought being entrepreneur in India meant being very grubby and working in the dark areas. And but it was in ICICI that when I saw a lot of entrepreneurs, especially with the after economic liberalization, when India was opening up, all the new things were happening, is where the seed got planted. And I think when we started Edelweiss, the hypothesis was that now capital markets, financial services will have a huge growth. A lot of our assumptions that we had have not panned out as much, but a lot of others have far exceeded our expectations. So in a way, I think you don't know what is going to happen in the future, but the idea was there. I think the opportunity was there, and you spoke earlier about risk, and I think being a professional, being an MBA who had a good job, I've always tried to figure this out. Is it easier or is it harder? Because I think in a way it is easier because you always have the fallback option. I mean, I remember very early on somebody said if you have an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad, you will not go hungry after that. So I think that was enough for you to go out and take some risk. But it's harder also because you're giving up something cushy, something that you are in your comfort zone. And actually, more importantly, I think the most important part in India, and it still grates me that in India, I think we still don't respect entrepreneurs, especially at the startup stage. We respect entrepreneurs once they are reasonably successful, but in the early days of an entrepreneur journey, whether it's any kind of startup, it is always seen as a slightly lower social status than a nice job in a very familiar company. Including, I mean, I have had stories of people who are going to get engaged, and when they quit their job and started a company, I think suddenly their potential in-laws were questioning whether it's a good thing to allow their daughters to get married. So I think startup entrepreneurs are not seen as really guys who are taking risk and creating something, and I think really admired and respected as much as they should be in my eyes. So I think the hardest part is losing that social status that you had when you had a nice big job, and then you're getting into startup and giving up quite a bit of that. But I think on hindsight, and in my Edelweiss job also, I've advised quite a few entrepreneurs, work very closely with a lot of startup companies, and I found on hindsight, on the whole, the trade-off is more than worth it. I mean, what you give away in your salary or what you give away in your social status and all that, and a couple of years of that uncomfortable feeling that you take, what you get out of it, not just financially, not just professionally, but I think as an individual also, because if you can afford to take risk and the opportunity is there, I think people who take that risk, there is usually positive outcome on that. So on the whole, I think it's a...
Yeah, thanks, Rasesh. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of this, but I'm not very sure whether your observation is correct. What does the audience feel that, do you look down upon on startups? They don't have any social status? Anybody has any comment to make? Well, I think we respect them, and in media, every newspapers and magazines, periodically you will find that the new sections on the new entrepreneurs and startups and innovators and all. So there's a lot of importance given to that segment. So
I'd like to add, I think
please.
you're absolutely right, because a lot of entrepreneurs have said this.
Okay.
A lot of startup entrepreneurs.
So maybe for the would-be in-laws and those kind of thing. Huh?
Placed very seriously by young people
Okay.
in the marriage market. And he
Yeah, marriage market.
Like,
Yeah.
can I add something, Tamal? Like,
Yeah, no, not add. You are all yours. This is your turn.
in the same context, and then I'll come back.
Yeah.
In an event like this, only successful entrepreneurs are called. You don't call startups and say that share your vision.
Okay. Tell us about your migration from being a professional to a entrepreneur.
Yeah, in fact, like Rasesh, I also had passed out from the same class of IIM Ahmedabad and we had done MBA. And pretty much I agree with him that financial liberalization and reforms that happened in 1991, and many of you are too young to know how India was in 70s and 80s. I think what changed after that is that it became a much more conducive environment for professionals to become entrepreneurs. And I think even the social status, what Rasesh and I became entrepreneur at that time and now, it's also different now. I think now it's acceptable fact that, okay, a professionally qualified person also can become an entrepreneur and there's nothing wrong about it. But if you go back to the mindset of 70s and 80s, then what was entrepreneurship? Entrepreneurship was basically manipulating to get licenses, corrupting the sales tax and excise official and getting your way out, a very closed economy and generally low economic growth. So those were different days compared to 90s and the last decade. I think so last 20 years have been the complete radical sea change and we are that way fortunate. So I also come from a business family. I mean, he's from a Gujarati business family. I'm from a Marwadi business family, a small business. And normally in business families, there are very few professionals produced, but at least doing your own business was respected. So there's a bit of a contradiction here. But so when we started, I joined Hindustan Lever. That was the good job at that point in time. And when I compared with my family business, were completely, I mean, they're very different. They're as different as they could be. So here's a large multinational which is controlled from London, and I was wondering that people, the bosses sit in UK, and how do they make people work hard here till midnight or whatever? Whereas what I've seen in my small family business, that entrepreneur has to be there on the head of the people to see that things get done. So I think that learning helped me a lot, as the business scaled up. And in fact, another thing is that, Rasesh said that if you're an entrepreneur, you pay the price and the outcome is good. Maybe one caveat here is that, I don't know, I may be a little this thing, but maybe 9 out of 10 don't really succeed or don't make the mark to actually be counted and be respected as such. So one has to be prepared for the risk. There's always a risk-return trade-off that if you make it, then there's a jackpot, but there's a good possibility that you may have to work hard and still don't make it to the big league. I think I go back to the title of this event, which is quite apt, that bold professionals to real entrepreneur. Because when you're a professional and you have a very good job, which pays you very well, and there's a safety, you really don't have to worry about you really don't have to take it too hard, the risk and the stress and the tension that come with the owners and with the entrepreneurs. So you have to be really bold professional to take a plunge and take the leap of faith. But once you become entrepreneur, and particularly after you get some success, you have to be real. You can't take that reckless risk, or you can't be really bold. So it's bold professionals to real entrepreneurs. I think that is what the journey is. So I was in levers in terms of qualification, as I had MBA as well as CA, ICW, so I had a very strong finance background. And all of us could see the opportunity after 1991 as things started opening up. I was dabbling in stock market with friends like Rasesh and others, advising and tipping, if I can use that word. So I got a lot interested in the way stocks are analyzed, the way stocks are researched. Actually at that point in time, if you go back in those days, when India was a much poorer country, in fact, the GDP has tripled in these, in the time period that we have been entrepreneurs. So there was a lot of wealth and a lot of satisfaction of getting into something which is exciting was there. And what we didn't know at that point in time was the roller coaster ride that is going to be. So we had the best of the economic growth years, and we had the worst of economic crisis. We had the worst of scams, and also the best of regulatory changes, and catching up at the fastest pace. So I think it has been quite a very exciting and thrilling experience in last 2 decades or so that we have been entrepreneurs. Going back to the journey, I'm a bit random, but as Tamal said that we can be informal and just share our thoughts and feelings the way they come. So from levers, I took the plunge, and then original idea was equity research and not becoming a broker. Because coming from a trading family, broker was certainly looked down upon. No respectable father would marry his daughter to a broker or dalal, as my father would call them.
Even among Gujaratis. Even among Gujaratis?
Gujarati, I mean, Dalal would be looked down upon, in those days at least. It's a Dalla kind of a thing. So it's, and forget about broker, but so we are the largest life insurance agent and broker. Selling life insurance was the last thing. My father used to say that if you are not a married man, you'll be chased by unmarried girls' fathers. And if you're a married man, then you'll be chased by insurance agents. So I think that was, if somebody had woken me up from night and said that you want, for the rest of your life, you want to sell insurance of vegetables, I'm sure I would have chosen the latter. It's the kind of product that it is. But having said this, the way we do it, the scale and the professionalism, of course, is now financial services and is something which looks a lot more respectable. But just a very quick take on the last 18 years, it's not that today I can say that, okay, we saw an opportunity in financial services and we thought that there's an opportunity to create something new, paradigm shift from online trading, life insurance, mutual fund, wealth management. But the reality is that business model kept evolving and we took one day at a time and kept moving, kept responding to challenges from the environment, from competition, from regulators, from everywhere. So originally it was a research firm, so we wanted to be something like Bloomberg. Then we realized it's not working, we became a .com. Then we realized that .com was sort of a media company or maybe more like so originally we started as a consulting firm which was like McKinsey was with Levers, McKinsey's first assignment was with Levers. And I really like their business model because they get a lot of respect without having any responsibility to run the business. So it was very safe and very well-paying kind of a business, but it didn't work. From there, we became broker, then we started selling insurance, then we started selling mutual fund, then we got into institutional broking, wealth management. So we kept moving on, and I think that's how the journey has been.
And now we are planning to seek a banking license. So that's
if we get an opportunity, then we'll become bank.
So that's the connecting link.
We'll have friends like Paresh to teach us a few lessons and books like yours to help us.
So that's the connecting link between Rasesh and Nirmal. Both of them, yes, both of them
and
are Gujaratis.
Paresh also for that matter.
No, both of them are Gujaratis. Both of them are entrepreneurs, and both of them are seeking banking license. Okay, so they are competing. Paresh is a non-Gujarati and half entrepreneur. Now, tell us, that's a theoretical level how you, but tell us some, let everybody know the eureka moment, like when actually do you decide, what was the tipping point, and what are the things that you had to sacrifice, how do you bring the money, so on and so forth. That nitty-gritty, the stories, just tell us. We start with Rasesh. Just the day you walked in or whatever, you sent those days no email, I guess you sent a resignation letter to Bagul's office or wherever. So when did you take that call? What was the precise provocation? And how did you get the seed money? Because I'm sure the PUPs were not around at that time. So is it?
No, actually,
I
I think it was a slightly more convoluted journey in my case. I quit ICICI to go to one other company.
Which company? Now you can
actually, the idea was to create the same, what we have created in Edelweiss, which was a broad-based financial services company with a lot of professional, a lot of internal ownership. So I went to a company called Prime Securities, and I also had a very small equity stake out there because it was already an established company. So in a way, it was a semi-entrepreneur kind of an opportunity. But the idea was to build a very respected, diversified financial services company. And then I found that the business model that we had and I think the way we were executing that was, there was still a gap. So eventually I got frustrated and kept on trying. And then I think there was a eureka moment where I said that eventually if I truly believed in that business model, and actually what we executed in Edelweiss coincidentally has been exactly what we wrote in those about 18 years ago. And it was at that point that when I was in ICICI, Mr. Narayan Murthy of Infosys was a client of ours. At that point of time, Infosys was a very small company. And he was always a catalyst of saying this is a new India, be entrepreneurs, and he's always been a very big evangelist for entrepreneurship. So I was speaking to him once and he said, if you have an idea and you truly believe in that, you will have to execute it on your own. I was still not yet really prepared to be a full-scale entrepreneur. I wanted to have that business model but work in a established platform to execute on that. But I think after that conversation with him where he said, if it's your idea, your plan, and you want to do it, then go out and actually do it on your own, because if you try to do this hybrid approach to this, it will always get compromised. And I think it was at that point, I remember I came home, chatted with Vidya, my wife, and then said, maybe I should just, start this. And then I spoke to a couple of friends who all initially agreed to be also part of that, but eventually I think very few of them joined. And the idea was actually born out of that. In a way, it was out of compulsion more than anything else, that if you wanted to execute that, you had to create the entire platform on your own.
Mine was also similar. In fact, from Hindustan Lever, I joined Motilal Oswal and Ramdev Agrawal. They are brokers, and they were introduced by a common friend, Sanjay Bhattacharya, who was son of a prof in Ahmedabad. And so it was a bit of a quasi-entrepreneurship because I had worked in a FMCG company and I didn't know much about the financial services. So there are two choices, either look for a job, but ultimately I wanted to be an entrepreneur coming from a business family and looking at opportunity to create wealth. So it was a bit of a partnership kind of a thing that we set up the research department and then can join and have equity and become partners. So it was a good experience. But when I did that, of course, it took a lot of time, discussion with family, wife, friends, and everything, and nobody was sure that what I was doing was right. In fact, when I put in my paper, I remember that my boss threw that resignation letter on my face that have you gone mad, that you can encash lever card only once, and a broker is a broker is a broker. So if you want to join a broker, then you must take a couple of days leave and just understand what you're doing, kind of a thing. And I'll give you another story because how brokers were looked down upon, and even entrepreneurship and the startup, as Rasesh was saying, in terms of social status. After I joined Motilal Oswal, I was traveling to Pune in Indrayani Express in those days. So there was an elderly man sitting next to me and started chatting. So he discovered that, okay, I'm an Ahmedabad graduate and I worked with levers. And then I left now and setting up a research department which was called Inquire, which was along with these two brokers. So he looked at me, heard me, kept quiet for 5 minutes, and then asked me, were you sacked? I said, why? Nobody leaves Hindustan Lever job like that. So I mean, that's the kind of, so from there, and that continued for 1.5 years, and then I think we had a very amicable parting because I wanted to have a larger equity stake and have something of my own. So that is how the turn of events has been.
Yeah, Paresh, you said you are a half entrepreneur. So you didn't have to get the seed money and all, but tell us that moment when you got the call either from Deepak Parekh or Aditya Puri, I don't know. How did the meeting and what's the kind of sacrifice you did? I know there are huge stock options, but at that time nobody knew that the bank could do so well. So in that sense, that the money came much later and after you proved yourself. But so on the table, my impression or understanding was that you had to take a salary cut and you had to take a cut in every other way in terms of material comforts. So how did you convince your family and what was the unique moment that you actually decided to take a call and why?
Yeah. I think, while now, today, even when you look at a new bank and, the interest in new banks, the fact that there's this huge opportunity for private sector banking, I don't think at that point of time this was something which was realized because it was just the fact that RBI was giving a few more licenses and HDFC was one of the entities which had got this license.
That's the first time RBI was giving license, right?
Yes, after years. I mean, this was the first time that, under the liberalization. So I think it goes back to the point was made earlier that in many ways we are a product of the liberalization. I also think on that particular theme that the transition of India into being much more of a services economy, with well over 50%, has also made this transition from professionals to entrepreneurs that much easier. I don't think you had so many professionals in manufacturing companies, having the ability to start off, but whether it's in the financial services or maybe, doctors starting hospitals or in the IT sector, I think it's easier in the services sector. Because you're ultimately dealing with, your main product or your main input is people and skills, and therefore I think that transition is easier. But coming back to my story, yeah, I think it was a question of, we were approached and I was approached. I did know, Aditya, I had worked with him at Citi, and there were a couple of others from various other banks, and so the immediate sacrifice, if you might call it, was more taking actual financial cut in terms of salary, in terms of some of the frills which go with that, in terms of compensation, your so-called club memberships, all the other things which today might sound not so important in terms of a decision, but clearly at that point of time, it's important, and I think that's what's relevant. But and I must confess that, the stock options were really small at that point of time because it was a startup and, it was in many ways chicken feed in absolute terms. It's over 15 years that, with some driblets, you sort of tend to build the stock option piece. So I think, but yes, I mean, we were not committing our own capital to that extent, as you rightly said, it's a half entrepreneurial thing. But it's a 0-1 situation, right? I mean, I go back to what Rasesh said, that yes, if we had not made it happen, theoretically we could have gone back to jobs. But I think, I don't think that's something which ever crossed our mind, and by God's grace, I think the bank continued to move from strength to strength. But I think upfront, when we started off, and it was starting from scratch, I think what was important was that we wanted to build a world-class Indian bank. And I think that was something which got a lot of us together. We were in institutions which were successful. Maybe we ourselves as individuals had various, varying levels of success in those institutions. But we just felt that it was possible and we wanted to create a world-class Indian bank. And, we actually this was something we put in our first annual report. And I know there were a lot of, even some of my former colleagues were very cynical and, sort of gave me a call and, sarcastically sort of, pointed out that this was being a little too ambitious. When your first annual report, you don't really say that you're starting off, putting together a world-class Indian bank. And maybe in some ways it sort of increases your determination not to, mess up or not to slip up and, I think, make it happen. But, to the point about, not being able to do both, being an entrepreneur or being a professional and not being able to straddle the two. If I can ask you, Tamal, you're this, being an editor in arguably, one of the most successful financial dailies, and then sort of, flirting with writing books is, in its own way, trying your hand at entrepreneurship with the security of having and the status of having editorship in Financial Daily. So you get the access and you get the ability to create something from scratch.
Yeah, it's very, I never thought on this line. I don't think it's entrepreneurship in that sense. We are all of us in the knowledge, so-called knowledge business. So what happened is this: you continuously strive to look for ways to break the monotony and do something do things which excite you. So this is our ways of, it's not intellectual anarchy, but looking for new channels, looking for new ways to channel your energy and get some excitement and make your living little better. So from reporters you become editor. That's a logical progression in the profession. But unfortunately, in Indian context, what happens in journalism? When you become senior, your journalistic work becomes a little less and more it's a man management and organizational other issues and all. So then if you have an adventurous streak, you look for little windows to how do you keep yourself exciting, and because not everybody wants to quit journalism and become the logical progression, or the lateral progression is to become a communication person or during the dot-com boom, some of us became entrepreneurs. But if you don't have the guts to become an entrepreneur, and if you don't have the knack to become a communication person, if you want to remain a journalist, then you look for other ways. So what are the other ways available for us? You write a column, you do some TV programs if you want to do, and then I guess all of us have the mind that why don't you migrate and try to attempt to become an author. So what you write a 1,000-piece column, you make it 70,000. So 70 columns put together becomes a book. So it's the ways of as I said, to channel your energy and get yourself excited so that you remain in the profession. Don't look otherwise. Thanks for the question. Nirmal, tell us those early days, like were there any moments that when you regretted and we thought, oh God, I made a mistake, it's a thing, I mean the empty office, or there are only a handful of people around, or very difficult to get your first customer? Why don't you recount that story, first few months, first few days, first few years, how it is?
So it was a bit of a roller coaster actually. The regrets were recurring many times. And just to put things in perspective, because when I was about to leave Levers, I had done my health checkup because there was a liver doctor who set up his own clinic. So all parameters were absolutely perfectly okay, everything in normal range. And I used to sleep like a baby that time. After 5 years, when I did my blood checkup and health checkup, everything had gone out of the range.
Okay.
And I was still sleeping like a baby, waking up every hour. So in fact, till 2003, it was still a survival struggle, because it was up and down, up and down. The IT report sold very well in 99, 2000, but again, there was a 2001, we started our broking and Ketan Parekh and these crises, which just brought us to our knees. So there are several moments, but I think in the first, from 1995 till 2002, 2003, we had struggle, and after that, business stabilized.
Paresh, early days, I'm sure the office was not as full as it is today, and people are trickling in. I was told that your office looked like essentially railway ticket counter. People used to come and give the receipt, and the secretary used to give the money for the flights and the hotel reception, all kind of things.
No, I think, in fact, Tamal, the location was just across. We were at Sandoz house here. And
was there any moment that you told you, oh God, where am I? I should have been with City?
Well, I think for starters, when we went in, when we had actually leased those premises, and they had been vacated by Sandoz house. So I think, they moved whatever furniture, etc., that they wanted to. And when we first moved in, we moved into a floor which had a few partitions, or a few partitions with the glass removed, a few chairs, some of which were broken, etc. And that was the time that we were interviewing candidates. And which is why, when one of the things was, if on a half-broken sort of table and some chairs which were not, we tell him, just be careful, this chair is not sort of entirely okay. And if after all that you told this person that, this is, you're joining a bank which is going to be one of the best in India, and if he still believed you, then he was already there. And he was an entrepreneur, even if he was a startup employee there. But yes, I think, simple things like, in any office, when you are traveling, there is somebody who will do the booking for you because there's a travel agent and, all of that, who's used to servicing you. Those little things which you take for granted in a office environment, none of that was there. So you're absolutely right. Somebody was trying to do the booking themselves, and you didn't that time, do these things on the net. So it was that much more difficult. Even in terms of the actually going and calling on customers. In the initial stages, we were much more of a corporate banking sort of an entity, because we didn't have the branches, and we didn't have the ability to invest in hundreds of branches. And I can tell you that while as individuals, some of these finance managers or VP finances or CFOs out of courtesy would give you a meeting, a lot of them were pretty blunt about the fact that you can come and have a cup of coffee with me anytime, but don't really immediately expect me to give you a business. And I think I had mentioned this to you. One multinational company in down south gave us an appointment and then made us wait for a couple of hours, and then saw us for a couple of minutes, and essentially said, there's nothing that you can give me which my existing bankers can't give me. And of course, we still made our pitch and came out. So there were clearly experiences which if you had any ego, it would be sort of just kuchal dete hain, I mean, basically ground to this thing, which is, I think, which is good, because that is part of building an institution. If you think that merely because you have come from a successful institution, you have a right to build a successful institution, or that you carry those sort of airs with you, then I think you are unlikely to succeed, because you are creating something from scratch. And I think you've got to have the humility and the willingness to accept that you will make some mistakes, and make many mistakes sometimes. So I think it was I think all of us will agree that it's always a mixed bag. You tend to sort of thereafter ignore or overlook the stuff.
How did your family react? And talking about institutional building, you didn't say here about this classes under the tree in the Kamla Mills compound, or the sessions and putting off the computers, and then rats chewing off the wires and computers going off at a gala in Kamla Mills. So.
Yeah, so I think we didn't, since we were trying to do a lot of things together, and we were getting employees in, and we wanted to train, our premises were obviously being, getting sort of renovated and so on. So we actually took some space in an industrial gala, which was again on what is now the extremely tony sort of neighborhood of Phoenix Mills, and all of that, and that gala is still incidentally there, just next to the bridge which has come up. And there were two things. One was it was an industrial gala, so it was just like an open space. And we had to set up computers and stuff like that to train. One of the other issues there was no ladies' toilet, incidentally. So there were all sorts of issues which now you can sort of make light of and makes it sound very wonderful if we did all of that at that point of time. But those were actually huge headaches at that point of time. I mean, how do you actually train individuals who, and what he says is right, we had connected this to form a small LAN, and one day we started the training session, it wouldn't start, and we figured that the cables had been chewed up by rats, which were very common in that gala. So then we sort of said, okay, let's go out of this place. We had just taken some premises at Kamla Mills where the mill had been flattened out, so it was like a football field, and there was this small temple and a tree, which is incidentally still there in the, so we actually sat under the tree and said, okay, let's conduct the next training session here. And I think the camaraderie and the feeling of belonging to an institution and therefore feeling part of the institution, not just for the people with gray hair, but the youngsters who are coming in and who decided to stay on and be part of that, I think that just helped build the institution. Because maybe if we had afforded to and if we had been willing to hire places in business centers or perhaps hotels, 5-star hotels to conduct that training session, the fact that we were starting something and therefore needed to watch our expense line or be far more shall I say closely knit in terms of what we were doing, that feeling may not have come up. So I think some of these things that we didn't do consciously actually perhaps helped that feeling of being part of an institutional building.
Rasesh, your early days, and was there any regret at any point of time? Where did you ever say that, oh God, why did I leave Prime Securities? I should have been there. What was the scene like?
Actually, my experience was exactly opposite of Nirmal.
Okay.
When I was earlier in ICICI and Prime, I used to fall ill very often.
Okay.
And
Okay.
in my almost 18 years of Edelweiss, I haven't taken even one day off on because of any illness or any medical emergency. So I think it's different things that, but I think it's also very energizing. I think a startup environment usually, I think all the good things are very energizing. You have that camaraderie, you have that can-do attitude. I think the can-do attitude that you have at that phase, slowly you start becoming more realistic as you go along. On the other side is, I think, putting up with all the petty humiliations and small things of everyday life of trying to get customers and all. It makes you hardy, no matter how prepared you are. It is always, those small incidents and all.
Tell us some of the incident. Tell us some of the stories.
No, I think it is the same thing. A client calling you 10 times, making you do all the work, and then at the end of the day, giving the mandate off to somebody else. I think employees who one of the insights I had is even before we got our main office, I actually quit my job and started the company. And for 8 months, I was all alone until the other guys were to join, because we didn't have our office in place and all. So I had a small cabin that a friend of mine had given somewhere near Akbar Ali's. And since we were very clear, the company was getting formed. We had a new office where the interiors was going on and all. So in that office, I was hiring people. So I called quite a few people I knew from ICICI and others, and I was giving out appointment letters on basically blank piece of paper. And quite a few people would accept that. But after a month or 2 months, almost everybody had a reason, some problem, somebody's illness in the family, somebody's sister was getting married, something else was happening. But there was a recurring pattern that people were saying, I will join afterwards. And the insight that I had, the epiphany I had is people want to work in something that is real. So then we said we will not try to do any more hiring, any more proactive hiring. We'll wait until the office is up and running. So we had a small office, about 450 square feet, but that office looked decent. There was a fax machine and a phone and a small conference room and a cabin out there. After that office started is when I really started hiring people. So I think the early days in the offices, I would go there. It was actually very expensive at that time. So almost about 30-35% of a cost for a month was the office rent. So every day morning I would come and I would say another 3,000 rupees gone today because I was the only guy in the office sitting out there, and then hiring people. But it got a lot easier to hire people when you had this, the computer and the fax machine and the phone system out there. And obviously, because even hiring a receptionist is very hard when you don't have an office. So I think but all these are small things. I mean, it hurt a lot more when people accepted the offer and did not join because people didn't believe in the idea as such. But I think all that it makes you hardy. You become, I think, stronger fairly quickly. But I think it's also a lot more energizing. And I think one of the things that I found, and I think as Nirmal said, the business model constantly evolved. And one of the key things we had, which is the same thing Mr. Murthy had said, that be profitable. And we have been profitable every quarter since we started. So our thing was, no matter how frustrating it got, we knew that as long as we are healthy, we are financially healthy, things will evolve. We'll find the business model, the right products, the clients will come, people will come. And there was always that, I think, we were always fairly sure that wo to sab ho jayega, as long as we keep our head above the ground, we keep our head above the water. And we constantly focused on that, and I think that kept us energized over the years.
Thanks, Rasesh.
You spoke about evolving business models, and the buzzword today is pivot. Entrepreneurs talk about pivoting. So as an entrepreneur, when do you know when to persevere and when to pivot?
To keep on breaking your head where the odds are against you, at some point of time you need to fold and play another game. And I think there is no answer to that. But usually, if like in our case, there is a lot of internal, conversation, debate, and discussion and all. And we have the executive committee, and you can come to a fairly good hypothesis about whether the world has structurally changed. Like for example, in our case, we were largely a capital markets oriented firm, wholesale oriented until 2007. And as we know, the world changed, capital markets, I think, have undergone a huge change, and we had to make a transition from capital markets to credit to commodities, now insurance, and it was a fairly important call that the way capital markets is going to evolve in the future has now changed, structurally changed. For the first almost, I think 11-12 years, we grew on the back of capital markets. So you reach a point, you form a hypothesis, and I think what I've seen with most good companies is you form a hypothesis and don't go all out in that. You then test the hypothesis, you take calculated bets in adjacent markets, you try to expand out there, and then that evolves because your hypothesis also gets refined all the time. But I think the way we do is constantly think that the way we see the world every day is a hypothesis, and keep cross-saying that hypothesis and allow that hypothesis to evolve as we go along.
What are the parameters that you were looking at?
I think parameters, one would be your employee feedback, because a lot of your people are seeing stuff out there. So if you talk to them, they actually see what is changing and what is not changed. And I think the key, I think to answer your question the other way, you have to constantly make a bet on whether this is a cyclical event or a structural change. And I think this cyclical and structural are the key ones, and they are usually transformational for any industry. And because a cyclical, you want to be counter-cyclical and invest more and basically double up when things are bad, so that when they come back, you are good. But if it's structural change, then you want to expand, diversify outside of that and put that on hold pattern. So I think an important parameter is employee inputs, customer client input, and third is environment. When you speak to the regulators, when you speak to people outside in the environment, and you have to seek out a lot of inputs, a lot of feedback, and then have this internal, constant conversation, debate, discussion going on to arrive at that. But I think cyclical to structural is an important one.
So you had mentioned that the environment being hard for startup entrepreneurs to come out, and now we have 600 million young people in our country, and the median age is about 25. So what are your thoughts to the panel in general to make the environment down here more conducive for young people to take up entrepreneurship as a viable career option? Yeah. What do you think about incubators and corporate entrepreneurship and mentoring young people who want to take the risks and start companies?
Sure. See, that way India is a country of entrepreneurs, and the enterprising spirit was set free in 1991. After that, We have seen mushrooming of lakhs of entrepreneurs, micro, small. See, to survive and persist is not so difficult. Now to make it big, sometimes a bit of luck also, a bit of this also, but the way environment has changed over the last 10 years, the hard reality is that you have to rely on your family and friends for the startup capital, unless you can really sell your idea very well. But once you have a bit of a success, then I think it's easy to raise capital.
What is the role of failure in entrepreneurship, and has the failure rate been increasing or decreasing since, say, the last 5 years?
Actually, I think the question you asked is a fairly important one. I think harder than the financial risk and others you carry, I think the social stigma, and that answers your question also. Over the last 20 years, it's easier to get capital, it's easier to get a lot of other resources. But I think in India, there is still a stigma attached to struggling. Even struggling isn't considered good enough. So I think failure is a fairly big hurdle. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs I've seen usually get mentally comfortable at failing, and ideally failing small. So I think the ideal way to approach failure is to fail often, fail small, and fail quickly and adapt as fast as. There is no entrepreneur who has stuck to the original business plan that was there. They tried that, it didn't work out. I think Nirmal was giving his example how it constantly evolves. So I think constant failure, but taking it in your stride and evolving around that is the only answer to that. And having that, I think overcoming that stigma of struggle and failure is a very important one that I think is a problem with India as a whole.
I want to know how you made sure that you are known to the clients. Did you advertise or something?
No, in the initial years, we did not advertise. So we met our clients personally. And 1995 to 1999, we were profitable. Then we became a .com and we had loss-making years. There's a time we are advertising. So I think it depends. It varies from business to business. But typically in a startup, you'll have to meet clients personally and do a lot of hard work yourself rather than, you won't have enough money to spend on media to create an awareness. It's very expensive and tough job for the startup at least. You go door to door, like we were selling our research report, so I'll carry research report and move from, all the potential clients, seek their appointment, wait outside for a couple of hours. Don't mind 2 minutes meeting, at least, you got the meeting and move on with that. So a lot of hard work and struggle. Every business will have a different model, but you have to reach out to your client customers rather than thinking that customers will come to you.
Thank you. We just have a last 1 minute each from you. Just give us the 3 big lessons that you have learned from entrepreneurship and which will guide the would-be entrepreneurs there and all. Rasesh, we'll start from you.
I think the first one I would say is, as I said earlier, constantly adapt. So you should always start with a plan and an idea and all, but always be very, very prepared to adapt, evolve constantly, because I think that constant evolution is the only answer. I don't think that there is any static, approach to this. The second one is be financially prudent, and as I said, being profitable, being well capitalized. There are a lot of entrepreneurs who are very savvy on the product side and the business side, but who ignore the financial side of the business. If you want to be successful, I think being slightly financially savvy and prudent is also a very important part of being an entrepreneur. The third is, I think what Nirmal earlier said is, and you asked about advertising, I think all entrepreneurs have to sell. So that I think ability to sell, that willingness to sell, that capability to sell is a very important part. You have to sell to hire employees in the early days. You have to sell your idea, your vision to clients, customers, investors, shareholders, everybody. So ability to sell is very important. I've met a lot of entrepreneurs. It's unimportant whether introvert or extrovert, but I think because introverts can also sell very well.
I'll just add to what Rasesh said. In fact, these 3 principles hold, but I can add another 3. So you should have courage of conviction, because many times when you try and seek advice from 10 people, everybody will give you different advice. So what decisions you take has to come out of your heart, and obviously they'll be based on knowledge and whatever you have learned. Number 2 is very important, is humility, and particularly for people who have got a very good educational qualification or a good family background, because I've seen, as again, in a way my father put it, that if there's a flood, the coconut trees fall, and the grass, nothing happens. I mean, the moment the flood is out. So you have to be humble. I think that's very, very important if you want to be successful. And the third thing is that as an entrepreneur, you'll be always dealing with people. So it's never a solo performance, always a team performance. You are not MF Hussain that you can paint this thing and forget about it. So interpersonal is very important. You have to understand other people's aspirations, their problems, and empathize with them.
You are a half entrepreneur, so I will not ask you to give a lessons of
Yes,
entrepreneurship.
after the two of them, I don't think there's a seventh one which is so valid.
but tell us, even being a professional from from an established job going to a startup, that leap of faith from there, what are the lessons that anyone can share from here?
I think if you want to achieve something which actually takes you to a new level, you have to move out of your comfort zone. So you need to have, just as an entrepreneur, he needs an idea which he believes in and then actually makes it happen. I think if you think you're cut out for better things, or you want to achieve something much more, you should be willing to step out of your comfort zone. It's like breaking an egg to make an omelette, right? You can't just have it and continue. And secondly, and this relates to this thing about failure. I think it's true that you should be willing to make a few mistakes and learn from them. But equally, I think don't get so passionate about the idea that you believe in, and learn to cut your losses. Because I think you have serial entrepreneurs who have had the wisdom to sometimes figure out that. So you become successful sometimes by recognizing that you need to drop out of certain entrepreneurial ventures.